My assessment is basically we should not pay much attention to what people are saying. That includes Iranians and Americans, because we're obviously close to a war. And so we will be inundated with people trying to prepare psychologically and prepare the situation for that purpose, saying things, whether they mean them or they don't mean them. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is notable. This is a recognized time where you start preparing the ground. You start preparing people psychologically, both ways, about what is happening. And Iran, of course, is psychologically preparing. Not only that, but its own people too, to suggest that everything has been done to avoid war. And of course, it's not in Arachi's power to avoid war, because it really hangs on the whim of one man who is unpredictable, but not even on him, because ultimately it is also about the other man in this exercise, which is Netanyahu and his auxiliaries and friends in America and donors, who are going to be, and we can see very clearly, are pushing very, very hard towards a war. So on the one hand, you have to calculate that Trump can see that there is danger here. I think everyone can detect he is hesitant. And he has put himself into a trap that was set for him by Netanyahu on the 28th of December at Mar-a-Lago, when he persuaded him that the key issue was not the nuclear one. And this is why, we shouldn't take this talk too seriously, because it was Netanyahu himself telling Trump then, and we read this in the Hebrew press. I mean, they gave an account, and he's given another account last Sunday night, and he was saying to Trump, what matters now are the ballistic missiles. He said, look, it's not the nuclear issue so much, because actually there's been such a change and development in missiles that the nuclear issue, really isn't so important anymore, because it's other missiles that count and new missiles that count. And the nuclear issue isn't the be-all and end-all of the issue with Iran. No, it is ballistic missiles first, then proxies, the proxies of Iran, as he calls them, Hezbollah, Yemenis, and also Hamas and others, all of these, then the nuclear one. And he warned Trump very carefully at that time and said, we won't accept a fudged nuclear deal. We're not going to have a fudge. And I can tell you, Mr. Trump, that if you do that, we will go against you. We will not endorse your fudge. In fact, we may come out opposing your fudge. Now, we don't have a veto in the United States exactly, but, the right wing of America actually looks to Israel on these issues and sets the tone for it. And if you don't accept this, then we reserve the right to go it alone. And if we go it alone, let's see you stay out of the war. You won't be able to. You'll be pulled into the war, but you'll be pulled in a disorganized way, not in a cooperative way, which would be what we need. And so he warned, and he said, look, if you come up with a fudge, I will deny you the kosher certificate. They actually used this term, saying that, it wouldn't have, if you like, Talmudic legitimacy. It would be, unacceptable, unclean, and we wouldn't support it. So this is, the discussion that took place then. And those terms, I don't think, have changed. His 4 red lines, Israel's red lines. The first being missiles, the second, proxies, the third, zero enrichment, and the uprooting of all the infrastructure. And the fourth, Hamas. Hamas has to be, that's part of the, Board of Peace. Hamas must be completely disarmed and de-radicalized in this process. So those are the 4 demands. And I think what you're seeing in these talks, first of all, I think Arachi was hinting at it, but he didn't actually say it. The reason that the Americans have not said, you have to stick to 0 or we're going to include the ballistic missiles, is these talks, even in these last events, were all about negotiating about negotiations. It wasn't actually starting negotiations. It was saying what could be in the talks, and for the Iranians to say what they wouldn't accept in the talks. And this is normal. I mean, the first thing you have to do is, set the framework, set the limits, and how you're going to handle the talks. And so, the negotiations haven't even begun. So we don't know what the American position is. In fact, what the American position seems to be, from what we can see, is the American position is you make concessions on the nuclear issue, and maybe they'll come back to the other issues later, but you make concessions on the nuclear issue, and maybe we'll push back on the threat to you. We will alleviate the threat. This isn't what Iran is negotiating for at all. What Iran is negotiating for is a lifting of tariffs and sanctions and economic strangulation on the country. Not some, that the, fleet of ships would sail another 500 kilometers away from the Iranian coast. And they say, see, we've done that. Now you have to give more concessions on the nuclear issue. I don't know that that has been put in quite formal ways. Certainly Trump has hinted, well, more than hinted, said, they've got to give concessions, and maybe then we will lift the threat. In fact, what he's been saying more recently is, maybe we will, give them a taste of military threat first to encourage them to make some greater concessions later. This won't work for Iran. Iran, I will not be able to accept this approach at all, especially because they know that these extra elements, the ballistic missiles, it's no secret. Trump has been saying it all along. Missiles, and this is what Netanyahu told him on the 20th. He said, it's not just that they are improving. It's not just that they're rebuilding their stocks of missiles. It is that they're creating a completely new paradigm of missiles, a new umbrella of missile things. This is new thinking, a new strategy, not just, building up the old one, going back to the old one. He said to them, and he said very clearly then, and he said, so it's something we cannot accept, because the net effect of this missile structure that Iran is erecting over the whole of the country means that at a later date, if they were going to move towards a nuclear weapon, there's nothing we can do about it. because the window would be shut. The umbrella would be in place. So this is the other aspect. We keep talking about it as if it's all sort of Trump whimsy, but it's there's another several layers to this. It is, if you like, finally going to be Trump's decision, which is in itself an extraordinary event. I mean, we're going back. I'm sitting not far from Rome, talking to you. I mean, we're going back to sort of the Roman emperors. This is entirely at the whims of an emperor. Is he? Will he? Won't he? And Netanyahu quietly in the background, giving him his instructions. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, Congress doesn't debate it. There's very little discussion about it. As I said to you just as we were starting, I mean, it's almost as if nothing is about to happen or nothing is in process. It's just people are sleepwalking on in Europe and America. Yes, they see that there is, lots of ships going to the Middle East, but that doesn't affect us, really. That's what they think. But of course, they may have a very big surprise coming to them, an unpleasant surprise coming to them by their sort of nonchalance towards what's happening. So that's, this is really the sort of essence of what, Trump is facing. And so he's facing really a dilemma. He is trying to, what he'd ideally wanted was to do, a quick operation into Iran, quick operation, that could be projected as punishing Iran for its massacre of the protesters, massacre in inverted commas, because we all know how much that's just propaganda. And the propaganda also is at full blast in Europe. I mean, it is really, at sort of volume 11. So, you read things in the Western newspapers about how Iran machine gunned the protesters down, and how thousands were killed, and it was a slaughter. And many people in America and in Europe now believe this. Narratives have become something that it's almost impossible to correct or displace. In fact, you're more or less wasting your energy trying to correct that sort of narrative, because it's now become ingrained. And the first thing, the protesters, how they were killed, and so on. So that's another element to this. But also then, this is also a bigger war. It's not just about Iran and its ballistic missiles. It's about Russia. It's about China. It's about BRICS. And it's about America's determination to dominate the energy field, to dominate, if you like, corridors, pathways, naval passages for vessels, and to, if you like, impose a siege, not only on Iran, but on Russia and on China, as they militarized many of the islands adjacent to China. And every day you see, of ships being seized. I mean, not even tankers. I think isn't it? The Danes have just seized an Iranian container ship because of problems in its registration. It had come from St. Petersburg or something. And so, I mean, this is a bigger war, and it's a war of, if you like, the power of Israel to to determine, to set and dominate the future of West Asia, and the power of those in the West and in Russia and China to oppose, if you like, the complete domination of the West Asia by whatever way is possible.
You've mentioned that the second round of negotiation was about defining the ground for negotiations between the two parties. And we know that, from what has happened in Syria, that Iran doesn't control Hamas, Hezbollah. They're not fully in charge of, each and every decisions on their part. And they're supporting them, but they're not running, the whole administration, the whole group, if you call them group, or some sort of, forces in, for example, in the case of Hamas. We know what we know from the Iranian part in the aftermath of October the 7th. Iranians said that 2 days or the day after the attack happened, Iran and the United States were supposed to negotiate, to talk. Iran didn't know October the 7th going to happen. That's why I don't see that Iran could do something to Hamas to convince them to disarm. These are somehow delusional sort of thinking if they really believe that Iran can do that. And
they don't understand the relationship, and they don't understand, that to a certain extent, of course, there is the sense of the community. I mean, Hamas, of course, is not, but for the Yemenis, for Hezbollah, those are part of, and for the Iraqis particularly, they feel that it's not just Iran, but Shiism that is being threatened, as it has been over the centuries, as it has been eliminated. After all, Shiism of one sort or another dominated West Asia many centuries ago and has been slowly, cut back and eroded. But even now, if you look at it, I mean, no one has the correct statistics on this because no one would want to get the statistics. But probably about half of West Asia is Shia of one sort or another. But, I mean, your point is very right. I mean, when it comes to the Houthis, but they are 7er Shia, not 12er Shia. So they don't take instruction from Iran. For Iran to cut its links to Hezbollah, I mean, is just nonsensical, because I don't think it's understood that actually it was from the houses and the institutions that were in southern Lebanon that the Safavid state was constructed. It was families and, if you like, intellectuals and academics from Lebanon 500 years ago created the Safavid state. They literally were transposed to Iran to create the state and its structures. Those are sort of things, you don't just sever them. I mean, they are organically connected to Iran. But it doesn't mean that Hezbollah takes orders from Iran. In fact, because I've spent a lot of time, one way or another in discussions or in dealing with Hezbollah, I would say, and certainly this was the case during the period of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, that it was more Tehran listening to Sayyid Hassan than Hassan taking orders from Tehran. These things were very much more complex. But all this complexity is put aside and it's sort of reduced to a simple narrative that is repeated and repeated. Iran is the head of the snake, and if we cut off the head of the snake, then all of these other elements would suddenly disappear. And and Israel would remain, part of, what did Lindsey Graham call it? Part of the community of nations again. After its government had been removed, it would become, part and parcel and close friends of Israel. When in fact, what we're seeing in the region is actually many of those states that were originally, either part of the Abraham Accord or part of the community of nations, have actually now become hostile and antagonistic to Iran. They can't do much because of their situation, but I mean it's quite striking, if you like, the warfare taking place nowadays between Saudi Arabia and UAE, and the Saudis calling the UAE, if you like, a Trojan horse for Israel. I mean, things have changed quite a lot. And of course, we know that what's happening in Iraq, Hashad people, Sistani, Grand Ayatollah Sistani, I think, has already said that if the supreme leader is attacked or killed, he will issue a fatwa for global jihad against America and Israel. And the Iraqis are preparing for a big conflict. And so are others preparing for it around the region, because look at Bahrain, 80% Shia or something. Even Saudi Arabia has a sizable Shia proportion. So I mean, it is much more complicated, but everything is cut down to the sort of narrative: cut the head off the snake, and everything will be fine. Of course, this oversimplification serves, for propaganda purposes, but doesn't really serve for understanding the reality of what is taking place.
Do you think that Donald Trump is prepared for a long war, for a war of attrition with Iran in the Middle East?
No. I mean, this is again the narrative that is coming out. But I think most experts, I mean, people like Will Scriver and so on military things, and not just him, many of the people, who are military, and I'm not, but say that they don't think that America could cope for more than some days, maybe 10 days or 12 days, because they do not have the air defense depth to be able to last longer than a very few days. Even on the ships, there is not a very large. The destroyers perhaps have altogether 50 or 100 air defense missiles. The rest are those Tomahawk missiles, but Tomahawk missiles are not air defense missiles. So, I mean, there is a great lack, and we saw that in the 12-day war with Israel, which was, if you like, has a bigger air force than America has now off the coast of Iran. That they were unable to use, and they basically ran out of air defense missiles very quickly during that period. And after about 4 days, were pleading with Trump for the ceasefire to come into being, because they were being attacked as they'd never been attacked before. So I don't think, I mean, they talk about this and it could go on for weeks. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure that they're capable of that. I mean, that the equipment and everything will sustain that. The carriers, the Ford that has just arrived, has been at sea for 8 months generally, and has got mechanical problems inside it that need to be addressed. Can they will they? How long can they leave it there? I mean, it's already been a long time, longer than normal practice, and big ships like that, which are already like a sort of city on the sea. But I mean, they have problems with the systems like cities do. The sewage isn't working properly. I think that's the problem with the fort. So, there are things that are problematic. And the other thing is that once they fired their air defense missiles, I am told by the experts that they cannot reload their tubes at sea, and they will have to go to a port to load the vertical missile takeoff systems on these ships. Once they've expended them, that's it. Then they have to go somewhere to get reloaded. But where are they going to go? If Hormuz is shut, they can't go to Bahrain. Which is where they would normally, I think, expect to go. They may have to go to Diego Garcia, and that's 3 to 4 days steaming for a ship to get there. So these are the real, these are the complications, and I think Trump is grappling with these complications. And so, still hoping that he could find some quick in-out operation that would, serve him to claim, I've done it, this was, Iran is destroyed, I've obliterated its missile systems and da-di-da-di-da, and now I'm waiting for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think he's getting the picture from his military advisors that things are complicated and the intelligence is complicated. And I mean, of course, I don't have access to the US military intelligence, but we can, because if you look for it in the Israeli, and particularly in the Hebrew language, you'll find that the Israeli intelligence is that even a major attack on Iran would not collapse the state. It cannot collapse the state. And that probably it would not have been collapsed. I mean, in any case, I mean, it couldn't. I mean, what happened earlier during that, manufactured insurrection inside Iran, they thought this was the moment that they could sort of leverage regime change, but they now realize it probably never would have happened. That it's just not going to happen. So what then is he going to try and do? Now, if he can't do regime change, if he can't destroy the state by air power, and air power is problematic. It's never brought about that sort of change anywhere, except perhaps Libya. But I mean, it's never brought about that sort of change for a major state like Iran. And Iran has defense weapons. So what is he going to do? Do a sort of, shoot and scoot, as the Americans call it, a quick, come in with aircraft, shoot at some building, some symbol of the regime or even the supreme leader or something, and then get out. And then say to Iran, now you've got to negotiate again, start and accept our terms. You have to capitulate. Well, this is not very credible. This is not going to happen. Because Iran have made it very clear throughout this period, if we are attacked, whether by Israel or by the United States, any attack, military attack from naval ships, it's all out war. That's it. And I think Iran is sticking to it. You can tell me if you think something differently, but I think that Iran understands that's the only logical position to take. and certainly not to go back, because that idea of, one attack goes back to what happened with the nuclear installations when it was agreed by Iran. It was the Americans proposed. They said, listen, we're just going to make these small attacks on the nuclear facilities. What type of attack it was is a separate issue. It wasn't what it was said to be, and it certainly wasn't obliteration. But it was agreed. And so, you saw when that was taking place, there was no evidence of air defenses from Iran at all. And then Iran attacked a very significant radar site in Al-Udeid base in Qatar. And then he said, okay, that's finished. Let's finish it. But it's quite hard to see here how he can do this at the moment. Quite hard to see how he can back down without looking. What he cannot stand is looking weak. And this is a real problem in the approach of negotiations, because what Iran negotiators there, who I don't think really believe it'll come to a conclusion, but the best they could get would be to go back to something resembling the 2018 JCPOA. I mean, that's the formula that the Americans and the Europeans are thinking of. But then he would be taunted and said, well, you're as weak as Obama. You're Obama. And you know that Trump cannot stand being associated with Obama or being thought of as having been weaker than Obama. So he's in a very, it's a dire quandary, I think.
But what can we learn? What have we learned from the conflict in the Red Sea, in the Bab el-Mandab, right after Donald Trump was elected in the United States? Pete Hegseth said that we're going to go against Yemeni Houthis, and it's going to be different from what the Biden administration was doing. We are going to be different. We're going to destroy them. And they went there. They saw that what's coming is not sustainable. They decided to somehow get out of the Red Sea. People are talking about that the type of weapons, that the amount of weapons that the United States has sent to the West Asia is totally different comparing to what has happened with the Houthis. But Iran is different comparing with the Houthis. Iran is a big country, has a lot of capabilities to fight back. That's why I think this sort of build-up makes sense for anybody who's comparing the situation with Iran with what has happened in the Red Sea. How do you see what Donald Trump did in the Red Sea and what could happen? And that may help us to understand the next step in considering the conflict between Iran and the United States.
Look, I'm not a military expert, but my understanding is that actually even now, it's perhaps just about getting to that point, but even now it is not on a par with, do you remember, there were at one stage 3 carriers off the Arabian Sea during that conflict with Yemen. Yes, there are many vessels standing well back from Iranian shores, but they are still, the more technical experts say they are not of a scale that was present during the Iraq War. And also there's something, what you're seeing in a sense, yes, totally there is maybe the figures, the total number of Tomahawk missiles aboard these vessels, maybe some people say it's 300 to 400. Maybe it's more, maybe it's 600. But anyway, this comes back to a fundamental point about the complications. Israel is a very small country. It takes half an hour to cross it, basically, the width. It has a population of about 6 million. It's a small, very focused, small piece of terrain. Iran is huge. It's equivalent to the whole of Western Europe. It has a population of 90 plus million. I mean, the scale of these things is quite different. If you're using sort of having to use missiles to suppress air defenses or whatever, if you look at Israel, I mean, they're very closely grouped together because there is a small geographical area. Iran, there are mountains, there are all sorts of areas, there's coastline. It's quite different, and the area is huge. So you take, say, 400 Tomahawk missiles, you take 400 Tomahawk missiles, of course they can do damage, but over an area the whole of Western Europe. I mean, you know, with all Iran's, if you like, capacities and infrastructure, there will be some damage, but will Iran survive it? I would say yes. And that presumes, of course, that America is able to strike, because it will not be able to recall that in the attack in June, the Israelis did not fly into Iranian airspace during that attack. What they did was to attack the air defenses. They actually did it by sabotage, not by missile attack and aircraft attack. They sent in small cells of Mossad trained groups that were equipped with attack drones and anti-tank weapons, the strike anti-tank weapons. And these were used to sabotage. They positioned them very close to the outward mobile air defenses of Iran and used them to attack the first layer of Iranian air defenses, the sort of the immediate eyes and ears. And it did have some effect in that it was a surprise to the to Iranians, to the IRGC. They didn't know what had happened. I mean, suddenly they were losing, you know, some of the air defenses, but there was no air attack, no missiles. No, because these were small groups of people on the ground destroying them. Well, all of that's gone. That surprise will not be repeated, nor will the uprising, the sort of the fake insurrection, can be repeated. Iran is pretty well cleared up, I think, the people who participated that were controlled by the outside world in order to sort of create the image of a state about to collapse that was on fire and people were running from the building and it was all, you know, about to collapse. So I think they've, the question is, can they, I think this next round of war, and here again, I underline, I'm not a military person, but I think it's going to be very much centered on the question of the technical war about radars and the more sophisticated radars. The Americans have 4, if you like, long-range radars positioned near Iran. I imagine one of the first objectives of Iran will be to destroy those radars, as they did the very expensive radars in Israel. And I think then Iran has also a completely different. It has, I believe, the Chinese long-range radar, which can detect stealth aircraft. We do know that the Iranian radars that were present in June were capable of detecting that, because I remember following it and during that conflict. And, you know, it got so far and all the F-35s were airborne and they were out. And suddenly they started saying to people, hey, hold on, because we've been painted by a radar. An unknown radar has picked us up and we're locked in on us. So all of that was not done from within Iranian airspace, but was standoff attacks with cruise missiles from Iraq and from Azerbaijan, I think, for Tehran. And so they didn't fly into it because of their concern for air defenses. And they were hoping then to use cruise missiles to destroy, having taken out, if you like, the first layer by sabotage, to take out other air defenses by the cruise missiles. But it didn't work. And the main element came back into Iran was able to make keep the main defensive radar system intact. There are 3 layers, I think, to this in Iran, and it was only the first layer that was damaged by sabotage. The second and third layer were largely intact. And so I think the Chinese have given Iran very important technical assistance and Iran has switched over from GPS and even the Russian system to Beidou system. And the Chinese, I believe, in 2025, gave Iran access to its military, its enciphered, highest grade military data links. So it has direct data links to the targeting ability of the Chinese satellite system, which is what the Americans were using in June for their own people. But now Iran has access to, you know, online real-time targeting information coming down over a secure link from satellites. And the Chinese are clearly in the business of this, because we've seen these photographs put out on the internet. You know, the Chinese are actually publishing pictures of the American aircraft in Odeid base and on Garcia and their THAAD missiles. So they can do it, and they do it. And of course, they're going to be giving this targeting to Iran. They'll be giving this targeting to Iran, and it'll be difficult for the United States to jam it, like they were able to when some of it was on GPS, and they could either withdraw GPS or they could spoof GPS. So it's going to be, I think, a different sort of war. The Chinese have an intercept vessel just off the coast called Ocean One. I mean, it has everything. It's like a sort of floating AWAC. You know, it has the ability to intercept communications. It also, and this is explicit in it, it also has undersea mapping. I mean, for submarines, American and Israeli submarines. All of this will be being fed, I think, to Iran. So I think it is going to be a very complicated exercise. I don't know how much of, Trump really hates, these sort of details. He's likes, things to be very simple. And so I don't know how much, they tell him about the problems, because he's been told, I'm sure, by the Israelis, no, we destroyed their air defenses in June. They were completely destroyed. Rubbish. What they destroyed in June by sabotage was the first layer, some of the first layer of a 3-layer process, and the missiles were not destroyed because they went on firing at Israel throughout that period, with inflicting huge damage. So it is not like that. Now, with the Beidou system giving direct real-time intelligence to these missile cities, how will it change the game? Well, I keep saying, and I always say that as qualification, I've seen and sat on the edges of wars quite a lot in my career, and you never know. I mean, whatever you think is going to happen in a war, there are always surprises, and things never work out. The plans that everyone starts on, the war will be 2 days, 3 days. I mean, you remember they said that about, the NATO's attack on the Serbs, that, it will be 2 or 3 days, they told the president, and it ended up by being 78 days. And they still didn't really have a complete victory over the Serbs. They only achieved it by a process of cutting the Serbs off from food and supplies and energy supplies. So the question is how effective will this air defense by Israel be? Well, all we can tell is this basically, not quite the same, was used by Pakistan in the war against India. It was called Link 17. But it doesn't use exactly the same structure, because some of it was Pakistani indigenous structures, but it was the same principle. So the Pakistani pilots had live-time intelligence flowing into them. They didn't even look at their radars because they were getting a battlescape from the satellite process. They destroyed the Indian Rafael Air Force, basically. I mean, I can't remember, 13 were shot down by Chinese missiles being fired by Pakistani aircraft. So one can say that, although it's not wholly proven, but there is, some good reason to believe that it can be very effective, and not effective, but could be a game changer.
I think one of the most important, issues with the conflict is that the way that the military experts, as you mentioned that you're not a military expert, but you gave us your understanding of the outcome of those people who are commenting on the war between Iran and the United States. But in your understanding, when a military expert says that we can do regime change by a quick war against Iran, for anybody who was in Iran, who understand the Iranian culture, who understand the society in Iran, there's somehow, for me, it's so difficult to understand what is happening in the mind of these people who think that they can do regime change by a war, by starting a war. It doesn't matter how forceful, how powerful is that war. It doesn't make any sort of change in Iran in terms of so-called regime change. What is in the mind of these people? I'm sure that many of these people are around the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself.
I think there's a sort of problem here of, they lack cognitive intelligence, because they believe, and those narratives are being propelled around the United States at the time, that 70% of Iranians are looking forward to a government to fall, and is produced by a particular organization. that receives money from the West to present these stories, when we know from the Maryland and the other people that have taken polls in Iran, you get a totally different picture. But I think what I mean by, the cognitive ignorance is they can't put themselves in the place. If you ask any American, what was the effect of 9/11 on the American people? They would say, we all came together. We came together as Americans and we determined that, we were going to do something about what had happened to us. Did they collapse and demand regime change in America? Absolutely not, just the opposite. Yet they cannot make that cognitive jump when it comes to Iran. They just are not capable of understanding that the attack of the 12th of, the attack on the 13th of June, on Friday the 13th, I think it was, actually brought Iran together. I mean, it certainly didn't give fuel to a desire to see a regime change. In any way, Iranians have got a very good example because the Americans have given them an example to avoid, which is what's happened in Syria. Okay, so that's your future. You want that to be in a complete dismembered war of everyone fighting one another and there being chaos and complete breakdown of society. Well, that's what regime change means, and they have it on their borders to see what it means. No, but they cannot make that cognitive jump to saying, well, actually what happened in the June attack galvanized Iranians towards nationalism, towards patriotism, and towards a sense of the collectiveness. And that's why I deliberately say collectiveness, because that's why it's important in Iraq and in Lebanon and in Yemen, because there is, I can't find a better expression, but, there are differences, of course, within Shiism, but still, Iran is the mothership in many ways. And, to see it destroyed is just not acceptable to Shia Iraqis or to Yemenis or anyone like this, because it's a civilizational war against something that has existed for thousands of years. And of course, people come together. But, I don't know what it is. You say something, you raise a very difficult point, but it's one that I keep coming back to and complaining about in the West, is the way of their thinking, the mechanical thinking, that, A is a function of B, and that they are, A means B. And the world is not like that. And what the West is stuck in this very mechanical, procedural way of thinking, putting thoughts out like on a clothesline, one at one end of the clothesline, and then you work up to the end of the clothesline. And it is very limiting in terms of its, complete lack of emotional intelligence. It's just little facts put out on the line, and it makes it very hard for them. So, I remember one expert who taught in America to the American military, and he said, there's just no empathy, understanding amongst the people I'm teaching. I mean, for them, China, listen, it's just completely shut down. It is completely blacked out. They haven't a clue what is China. And he said, it's the same. Russia, I mean, they can't cope with understanding. And Iran is beyond understanding, because I mean, for seculars, the idea that a whole state could still have, if you like, something that is based in a different metaphysics from their metaphysics, it's very hard for them. So, I think, and, the propaganda says it time and time again. Iran is weak, Russia is weak, China is weak. These are just sort of house of cards, and one blow and they'll all fall down. And, they grab onto these narratives and stay with them and absorb them. But it means that then huge mistakes can be made.
Just to wrap up this session, Alastair, not the case of Syria, what has happened in Syria put Israel in a totally different position, because before October the 7th, they were somehow normalizing the relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey, with all of these countries, Arab states in the Persian Gulf. You see what is happening today, even Lindsey Graham coming out that Saudi Arabia is going backward instead of coming forward. And Israel, Naftali Bennett said that the worst enemy, the new Iran, is Turkey. These are huge. I think the United States should understand, or there are people, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are thinking, is the war with Iran going to solve the problem with Israel in the Middle East? Because Israel is making new enemies. The enemies of Israel are increasing instead of, reducing. What do they think about these things? Because they want to go against Turkey, they want to go against Pakistan, they want to go against Saudi Arabia, they want to fight each and every, Tom Barak said something. He's a Zionist. He said that we cannot fight all of these Muslims on this planet for the sake of what Israel wants us to do. What is happening in terms of the new conflicts that Israel is seeking for?
The attempt to create, if you like, a Pax Judaica, a hegemony, a domination across the whole of West Asia, is producing a very strong antipathy and pushback. What you said about Turkey is quite right, because here you have the two things coming together: the greater Israel project and the greater Turkish project, the greater Ottoman project. And they're clashing precisely in Syria because, of course, Turkey believes that a large part of Syria is a part of the Turkic community and is theirs and not Israel. And so they will fight for it. And Israel is going to fight for its ability to do what it wants when it wants in Syria. Its complete freedom of action to take military action wherever, whenever, as ever, just as they do in Lebanon. And, this is creating a much bigger, if you like, conflict. And you rightly pointed out, that here you have Saudi Arabia, sort of saying we're not going to accept, that Israel is trying to surround us, Saudi Arabia. It was all right when it was Iran, but now, Saudi Arabia is worried that it's under siege, that UAE and Israel and others have been sort of plotting and so you've had that fight in Yemen, in the Hadramaut, when the Saudis threw out the UAE from the Hadramaut. They'd spent a long time getting there, and in 10 days they were thrown out, breaking that sort of link, and it's got worse in other ways. So yes, it is becoming much more of a sort of a conflict of projects. There's the Greater Israel project backed by the United States. There is the Turkish project. And of course, there is the BRICS project. And the BRICS project is slightly different because the BRICS project, equally, the United States wants to destroy the BRICS project because it wants to dominate the energy resources of the region, and it wants to dominate economically so that it can coerce flows of money to the United States, which it needs, first of all, to prop up its failing debt problem, but also because it needs it for investment, for the manufacturing that is not happening, that is promised to the MAGA and its base that there would be manufacturing, and that's not happening. And in fact, what we're seeing is China is actually really taking measures. We don't see it, the Chinese do it very quietly, but really significant measures. For example, it just told its banks, the Chinese banks, private and public banks, stop buying treasuries, start disinvesting in treasuries. It said it's going to start paying interest on digital renminbi holdings, like a sort of savings account. And so, you know, and China has this huge hold over the United States and others because they have used artificial intelligence not as the West has done, but to create a hugely self-sufficient, highly competitive economy, which is so competitive, it's price deflating. Whereas the West is price inflating, the opposite. So, I mean, America can't even really compete against China, nor Europe compete in these terms. So this is a major, if you like, element to this. And, you know, China and Russia see this, you know, what was outlined at the Munich report about the aspirations for a new colonial era coming into being. We have the power. We're going to ignore law. Rubio said we're going to ignore all of those international organizations. We will do what we believe we want to do. And so, you know, everyone can see it. This is why Turkey is so angry, because it sees, you know, if Iran is rolled over, Turkey will be next. Russia can see that the same thing will happen, that this is a juggernaut that they intend to stop. So, you know, and Iran has the misfortune of being at this point the sort of the focal pivot to this huge, if you like, conflict that is opening out across the globe. China, I mean, in the Chinese sense, and at one level, it's an economic one. It's about dollar hegemony, but at another level, it's about just imposing ruthlessly military power to coerce people or to destroy them if they stand in the way. So that's the big picture that is going on, and Iran is one small part of this bigger war.